Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I work as a software developer and have been at this mid-sized tech company for about 6 years. Started right out of college, and the work was interesting. My teammates were solid, and management mostly stayed out of our way. I worked my way up from junior developer to senior, and I was finally at a point where I felt confident in my skills and could mentor newer folks. Our old vice president of development was laid back and trusted us to do our jobs. He knew that good code comes from experience and collaboration, not from micromanaging every semicolon. When he announced his retirement, we were all worried about who would replace him. Our new vice president came from some big corporate environment where everything was process and paperwork. From day one, it was clear he thought our whole team was a bunch of amateurs who needed his guidance to write proper code. During his introduction meeting, he told us he looked at our current development practices and was shocked at the lack of oversight. He claimed that at his previous company, they had 0 defects because of their rigorous review process. My colleague sitting next to me whispered under his breath about how that sounded impossible, but we all just nodded politely. 2 weeks into his tenure, he called an all-hands meeting and laid out his new rules. He announced that every single line of code written by our team would require complete documentation and his personal review before deployment. He emphasized there would be no exceptions. One of my teammates raised his hand and asked if this applied even to minor bug fixes or simple variable changes. The new VP confirmed that every single line needed review. He said this was how professional development worked. I could see the frustration on everyone's faces, but we were all trying to be professional about it. I pointed out that this might create some bottlenecks and asked what would happen if he was in meetings or unavailable. He told me that we would simply have to wait because quality takes time, and he wasn't going to compromise on quality. After the meeting, he sent out a message on our team chat that basically repeated everything he said, but in writing. Something told me to take a screenshot of that message. Call it intuition, but I had a feeling this wasn't going to end well. Over the next few days, several of us tried to reason with him. We explained how this would slow down our sprint cycles, how it would affect our ability to respond to urgent client needs, how it went against every agile development principle we had been following successfully for years. His response was always the same. He told us he didn't care about our sprints or our agile practices. He said he only cared about perfect code, and perfect code required perfect oversight. That's when I decided to give him exactly what he asked for. The next week, I started documenting everything. And I mean everything. A simple function that added 2 numbers. I wrote a 3-paragraph explanation of addition, the mathematical principles behind it, potential edge cases, and the reasoning behind variable naming conventions. When I changed the variable name from temp to temporary for clarity, I wrote a full analysis of why descriptive variable names improve code readability, cited several software engineering textbooks, and included a risk assessment of the change. I sent him documentation that was longer than the actual code I was writing, every single day. My coworkers thought I was losing my mind at first. One of them asked me why I was writing a novel about a for loop. I simply told them I was following orders since every line needed documentation and review. It didn't take long for the effects to show. Simple bug fixes that used to take 20 minutes were now taking me 4 hours just to document properly. Then they would sit in the new VP's review queue for days because he was drowning in paperwork. Projects started missing deadlines. Our client releases got delayed. The whole development cycle ground to a halt. After 3 weeks of this, he finally snapped. He walked over to my desk looking furious and demanded to know what I thought I was doing. He accused me of deliberately overcomplicating simple tasks to cause delays. I told him I was sorry but didn't understand what he meant, since I was following his instructions exactly. He told me not to play dumb and complained that nobody documents a print statement with 2 pages of explanation. I told him I wanted to show him something and pulled up the screenshot of his original message. I pointed out that he said every single line of code needed complete documentation and his personal review, and that was exactly what I was doing. He stared at the screen for a long moment. He protested that I knew that wasn't what he meant, but I reminded him that it was what he said. I explained that I was just being thorough and professional like he wanted. He couldn't argue with his own written instructions. He walked back to his office, and I could hear him slamming things around. 2 days later came the breaking point. Our biggest client had been waiting for a critical security update that should have been deployed weeks ago. The delay was entirely due to the new VP's review process bottleneck. The client got fed up and canceled their contract extension, which was worth about $2 million over 3 years. That afternoon, the CEO called an emergency meeting. Word travels fast in a company our size, and everyone knew about the lost contract. The CEO demanded to know exactly why the update wasn't deployed on schedule. The new VP tried to blame our team's incompetence, but I had all my documentation ready. I showed the CEO the original message, explained how I had been following instructions to the letter, and demonstrated the review backlog that had built up. The CEO asked for clarification about whether the new VP really required personal review of every line of code, including single character changes. When the new VP started talking about how quality requires oversight, the CEO cut him off and said that quality requires results. He pointed out that we just lost our second largest client because of a 3-week delay on a routine security patch. The new VP was fired that Friday. The CEO sent out a company-wide email about returning to our previous development practices and trusting our experienced team to do what they had been doing successfully for years. My teammates bought me lunch that day, and our old collaborative workflow resumed immediately. We deployed the delayed updates within 48 hours and managed to salvage a few other projects that had been stuck in review limbo. I go to the local shooting range with my buddy every other weekend for about 3 years now. It started as a way to blow off steam after work, but it became something I genuinely enjoyed. He's an Air Force pilot, so he's naturally gifted with precision and staying calm under pressure. I work in IT, so the range is my escape from dealing with entitled customers who think their computer problems are life or death emergencies. The range we go to is pretty laid back. Most people there are respectful, follow the rules, and mind their own business. It's the kind of place where you can focus on your technique without drama. That's exactly what we expected when we walked in that Saturday morning. We grabbed our usual lane, put on our ear protection, and started setting up our equipment. That's when we noticed her. This woman in her 40s, blonde hair pulled back in that specific soccer mom style, and an attitude you could smell from across the room. She had a 12-year-old kid with her who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. At first, we just minded our own business. We loaded our magazines and started our practice routine. But this woman immediately started complaining about everything. The noise was too loud, the smell of gunpowder was bothering her, the ventilation wasn't good enough. Her voice carried across the entire range, and everyone was starting to notice. Then she picked up her pistol, a Glock from what I could see, and started waving it around like she was in some action movie. No proper grip, finger on the trigger, pointing it in unsafe directions. I leaned over to my buddy and whispered that this lady seemed a few rounds short of a full magazine. My friend chuckled and agreed, saying he bet she was going to make sure we all knew it. Sure enough, she walked over to our lane with that walk that screams entitlement. Her poor kid followed behind looking embarrassed. She told us in that tone that makes you want to roll your eyes that we boys were making way too much noise and her precious angel couldn't concentrate with all this racket. Now our shots were actually pretty quiet compared to some of the larger caliber guns other people were using, but logic wasn't exactly her strong suit. I apologized and said we'd try to keep it down. She huffed and walked away, but not before rolling her eyes. My friend and I exchanged looks and continued shooting. Occasionally, we'd look at each other and shake our heads at her over-the-top behavior. We weren't mocking her, just acknowledging the absurdity of the situation, but apparently she took our shared looks as personal attacks. She walked back over with fury written all over her face. She accused us of thinking this was a joke and mocking her and her son. I was about to explain that we weren't mocking anyone, but my friend spoke first. He told her to come on and said we were just here to enjoy some shooting, suggesting she should lighten up a little. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Her face turned red, and she raised her pistol, pointing it directly at my friend's chest. My heart started pounding. This had gone from annoying to dangerous in seconds. My friend asked her in a steady, calm voice if she was sure she wanted to go down this path. Years of military training, I guess. Meanwhile, I was calculating how quickly I could draw my own weapon if needed. She smirked and called him tough guy, asking what he was going to do about it. That's when my friend dropped his first revelation. He told her that, for starters, he was an Air Force pilot, and a pretty good shot too. I expected her to back down, maybe apologize. But this woman was committed to her tantrum. She said she wasn't buying his act and accused him of just bluffing to scare her. She swore that if we didn't stop this nonsense right now, she'd hurt him herself. The situation was escalating fast. Other people at the range had stopped shooting and were watching. The range officer was moving toward us but slowly, probably trying to assess the situation. My friend took a deep breath and his expression became completely serious. He told her that since she wanted another fact, he had a brain tumor that was terminal. He said he had nothing to lose really, so she could go ahead and shoot him if she thought that would prove something. In fact, he added, if she did, she'd actually be doing him a favor. The entire range went silent. Even I believed him for a moment, and I've known him for years. The woman's bravado started cracking. She stammered that he was lying. My friend asked if he looked like he was lying. He told her to take a good look at him, saying this was a man who was staring death in the face, and he wasn't scared of dying. She lowered her gun slightly, clearly unsure of what to do next. That's when my friend went for the knockout punch. He asked if she saw the guy behind him, meaning me. He said I wasn't bluffing either, and that I had a clear shot. If she made one wrong move, I was going to shoot her dead, right in front of her kid. Self-defense, of course. He asked if that was really what she wanted. Her son was staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. The reality of what she was doing seemed to finally hit her. She looked from my friend to me, then back to her kid, who was practically begging her with his expression to stop. The range was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. She slowly started to lower her weapon to the table, her hands shaking. The moment the gun touched the surface, my friend moved. Military training kicked in, and he disarmed her before she even realized what was happening. The pistol clattered to the floor, and he had her pinned against the table with practiced ease. I was already dialing 911, explaining the situation as calmly as I could manage. The range officer rushed over, his eyes wide. He asked what the hell had just happened. My friend replied that it was just an average day at the range. The police arrived within minutes. They reviewed the security footage, which clearly showed her threatening us with a loaded weapon. She was handcuffed and led away, her entitled demands reduced to desperate pleas about how it was all a misunderstanding. When the officers escorted her out, she shot one last death glare at my friend. He just stared back with that same calm expression he'd maintained throughout the entire confrontation. The range officer patted my friend on the back and said he'd handled that like a damn pro. My friend shrugged and said he was just doing what needed to be done. Plus, he added with a chuckle, he was a pro. After everything calmed down and we were packing up our gear, I turned to him with a smirk. I commented on his brain tumor story, saying that was quite the ace up his sleeve. He grinned back at me and said that desperate times call for desperate measures. Besides, it seemed to do the trick, didn't it? We both laughed, shaking our heads at the whole situation. Turns out, even a well-timed lie can be effective when someone's pointing a gun at your chest. The woman got charged with aggravated assault and endangering a minor. Her son, thankfully, was picked up by his father, who looked mortified when he heard what had happened. That was 6 months ago, and we still go to the same range. My parents divorced when I was young, so I spent weekends with my dad in his small apartment downtown. When I turned 18 and started college, my dad began expanding his social circle through mutual friends from work. That's how he met Harold. They bonded over sports and old movies. And suddenly, Harold was showing up to every barbecue, birthday party, and casual hangout my dad organized. From the moment I met Harold, something felt off. I was barely an adult focused on my studies and trying to figure out my life, but Harold seemed to think I was his personal project. While other adults treated me with basic respect when I transitioned into adulthood, Harold acted like I was a toddler who needed constant correction and guidance. The comments started small. During my freshman year, when I'd come home for visits, Harold would be there more often than not. He'd interrupt conversations I was having with other guests to point out how young I sounded, or how I still had so much growing up to do. When I mentioned my major in psychology, he'd shake his head and dismiss it as not being a real science, calling me sweetie, and saying I'd figure that out when I got older. I'd bite my tongue because my dad seemed to genuinely enjoy Harold's friendship. They'd spend hours talking about their shared interests, and I didn't want to ruin that for him. But Harold's behavior toward me got worse when time went on. By my sophomore year, the infantilizing comments became a regular feature of any gathering. I'd be talking to my dad's girlfriend about school or work, and Harold would jump in to tell everyone that I wasn't really 19, that I was just a baby, and that no one should let me fool them into thinking I knew what I was talking about. He'd say this while laughing like it was the most hilarious observation in the world. The other adults would usually look uncomfortable, but no one ever called him out. I started dreading family events because I knew Harold would be there, ready with his next patronizing comment. The worst part was how he'd notice my obvious discomfort and turn it into a game. Every single time I'd visibly react to his behavior, he'd tilt his head with this fake, concerned expression and ask if I hated him or something. I always said no because I could see my dad watching these interactions. I didn't want to cause drama or make things awkward for everyone else, so I'd force a smile and say I was fine, while Harold would grin like he'd won some kind of victory. The breaking point came during a barbecue at my dad's place when I was 20. I'd been working on a research paper all day, sitting quietly at the kitchen table with my laptop while the party went on around me. I wasn't bothering anyone, just trying to meet a deadline while still being present for the family gathering. When someone came over to chat, I closed my laptop and give them my full attention, answering questions about school and my plans after graduation. I thought I was handling the situation perfectly until Harold appeared next to my chair. Without any provocation or context, he announced to the entire room that he really liked me, even though I was an impolite brat. The whole party went quiet. I felt my face burn with embarrassment and anger. I've been nothing but polite all day, despite his usual comments about my age and maturity. Even if I had been rude, which I absolutely wasn't, who was he to call me names in front of my family? That day, I decided I was done. I started declining invitations to events where I knew Harold would be present. My dad noticed but didn't push the issue, probably assuming it was just a phase or that I was busy with school and work. For 6 years, I successfully avoided Harold by carefully timing my visits and asking my dad ahead of time who would be at various gatherings. I graduated college, got engaged to my partner, and we had a beautiful baby boy. Life was good when Harold wasn't in it. Yesterday was my dad's girlfriend's birthday, and they threw a small lunch party at his apartment. I really wanted to be there for her special day, so I went with my fiancé and our 6-month-old son. I was hoping Harold might not show up, but of course he was one of the first people I saw when we walked in. The moment he saw me, it was like no time had passed at all. Despite the fact that I'm now 26, engaged and a mother, Harold immediately started treating me like I was still that 18-year-old college freshman. He made comments about how I was playing house and questioned whether I was really ready for all this responsibility. I ignored him and focused on introducing my baby to the other guests. Most people were wonderful, cooing over my son and asking normal questions about motherhood and wedding planning. But Harold kept inserting himself into every conversation with his so-called helpful advice. He told me I was too young to be getting married and that most people my age were still figuring themselves out. He said being a mom was harder than I thought and that I'd understand when I was older. He also said he hoped I wasn't one of those women who thought she knew everything about babies just because she had one. The other guests looked increasingly uncomfortable with his comments, and a few people even tried to redirect the conversation or change the subject. But Harold was relentless. My baby had been sleeping peacefully in the bassinet I'd set up in my old room, but he woke up hungry around 2 o'clock. I excused myself from the party to breastfeed him, grateful for a break from Harold's constant commentary. When I returned to the living room about 30 minutes later, Harold was ready with more comments. He said he'd been wondering if I was struggling in there and that it sounded like my little guy was really demanding my attention. He said that's what happened when babies ran the show instead of parents. I sat down next to my fiance, who was across the room talking to my dad about work stuff. Harold immediately positioned himself near me and started interrupting a conversation I was having with another guest about pregnancy and childbirth experiences. He asked how old I was when I had my son and said 25 was pretty young for such a big responsibility. He wanted to know if I had help at home or if I was trying to do everything myself. The woman I'd been talking to looked confused by his intrusion, but Harold wasn't done. He said it was great that I was trying, but that parenting wasn't something you just figured out when you went along. He told us there was a lot of science behind child development that most young parents didn't understand. I tried to steer the conversation back to the original topic, but Harold kept pushing with more questions and unsolicited advice. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He asked if I'd ever thought about adoption when I found out I was pregnant, saying that sometimes that was the more mature choice for someone my age. The room went dead silent. The woman I'd been talking to looked shocked, and I could see other guests turning to stare at us. I felt like I'd been slapped. I stood up without saying a word, walked to the bassinet, and picked up my son. My fiancé immediately noticed something was wrong and came over. I told him we needed to leave right now. I started saying goodbye to everyone, thanking my dad's girlfriend for including us and wishing her a happy birthday. I hugged my dad and grabbed our diaper bag. Harold was noticeably absent from my goodbye rounds. When we reached the front door, Harold appeared out of nowhere. He asked where we were going and said the party was just getting started. I told him we needed to get home because it was nap time. He tried to convince us to stay a little longer, saying he felt like we barely got to catch up. I insisted we really needed to go. Harold asked if he'd said something wrong and said I seemed upset. My fiancé was already opening the door, but Harold stepped slightly in front of it, not quite blocking our way but making it clear he wanted to continue the conversation. Harold then asked if I was mad at him and whether I hated him or anything. It was the same question he'd been asking me for 8 years. The same manipulative little game where he'd push and push until I reacted, then act innocent and confused. But this time, I was done playing. I looked him straight in the eye and told him yes, I did hate him, and asked if we could go now. Harold's mouth fell open. He stepped aside without another word, and we walked out. In the car, my fiancé told me he was proud of me for finally standing up to Harold. He'd noticed Harold's behavior throughout the party and was disgusted by the adoption comment. We talked about how relieved I felt to finally be honest about my feelings. This morning my dad called. He was upset about what happened and thought I'd been too harsh. We argued for a few minutes before I told him about Harold's adoption comment. That seemed to surprise him, and he got quiet for a while. He said he didn't know Harold had said that. I told him there was a lot he didn't know about how Harold treated me, and that this had been going on for 8 years. We agreed to drop the subject for now, but I know this isn't over. Harold will probably complain to my dad about my rude behavior, and there might be more awkward conversations in my future. But for the first time in 8 years, I don't care what Harold thinks about me. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.